Oh, and thermal paste. I'll also note I worried about the sheer size of the heating element and the heater block being that direction and how you're going to insulate that some, but that's apparently what all this is the insulating tape to help hold heat in on it. So that'll be nice. At the same time as this upgrade, I also bought some of the heavier springs. As long as I've had this Ender 3 printer, I've never put bigger springs on it. So we're going to do that too. I'm actually going to start with opening up the control box and disconnecting the wires, since we have whole new wires to replace with. I'm not going to try to splice any garbage that I don't have to, so I'm going to take the box apart. I gotta laugh too and make a note here. I didn't realize that all of this that I have for a mount to attach my cable chain to, this is all broke. Cheap plastic. Oh well, get to recreate some of that.
What are you doing, demon dog? Oh, possessed puppy.
Okay, that arm's off. The other 3 screws are loosened, and this motor just kind of drops away. Yay, spare parts. The head itself just sitting on there. That'll stay with that motor for now. And I might end up using it on a different printer, I'm not sure. I have to laugh to a certain degree too, the detritus of plastic bits that has collected over the last year of running this printer. It's getting shaved off by the edge of the aluminum on that other block top. Okay, we'll spin the printer around. Now I'm going to pull that tube out. I'm going to take the screws off of this little custom printed mount I have for airflow over the stock heat block and everything. I'm going to just take this apart and loosen it all up. Got a few parts loose. Like I said, this plate that I've got on here, along with the fan shroud that was on here, is not original. This is something I printed. It's a different assembly. But I always appreciate when anybody else shows a video of the parts partway done. There's a bunch of over extruded plastic dumped all over the top of the block. Gross. That'll burn. So once those are loose, you can see it just the whole heat assembly just falls off of there. I'm going to disconnect this here, which is just a matter of pulling these blue retainer clips off, and you push down on the thing here and then pull up on the hose. So that's bit on there really, really well. These pneumatic clamps, they've got a set of teeth in them that bite into the hose. And normally when you push down on the little fitting on top, the little plastic cap, that makes those teeth pop open, but I can't pull this one out. So I'll just feed it back out of all this and leave it attached to the heat assembly for now. I want to break free. Being stupid. The other reason in process of elimination that stands out is that the only other fan in this whole thing that's hooked up to it is just the chassis fan for the board, and that's on a separate connector down here. Also well worth noting, negative on the left, positive on the right in the orientation I have the board, which is upside down from the schematic, which does show Okay, so I pulled them 2 out, one at a time actually, and they got a little easier as I kept going. I'm hoping that makes a little bit of room in the loom where I can pull the others out, because the other ones have the connectors on them, and that's going to make them a pain in the tail. That's my fear, is that I'm going to have to take the whole chain apart anyway, just because I'm going to have to feed a fresh wire with a connector on the end of it down through it. So yeah, the stock Ender extruder cable is all one molded ribbon along with the X-axis cable. So we are going to have to peel that apart and pull that cable out. I will say that one of the things that I will probably do when I get to the other wiring, I will take that little E tag that they put on there and I'll move those over to the new cable. Part of the beauty though too of unbundling this taping here and opening up my chain is that now my wiring loom, check this out. The whole loom is just loose. So we can bring that over here and rework that outside of the printer. Alright, so wiring loom is pulled off now. Now one thing that occurs to me is that in reassembling this, I do need to have a pair of wires run back in order to be my part cooler, even though I don't have a fan or assembly at the moment to put on there. So yeah, I gotta figure out which one of these I'm going to salvage and run back into it. Alright, so I decided after looking at some other parts, I'm just going to steal the blue and yellow wire I have because it has a connector on the other end that already fits the board, and so I just cut it free from this. So the nice thing about these looms is that you can kind of compress them, and since I took it out, this is helpful. I can compress it and I can get it opened up nice and wide, and I can get all the fat ends of those wires run through it. So I'm going to figure out how to do that now. Okay, got all my wiring run through the loom. All my wires for the board end, all my wires for the print end, and I'm going to start hooking up these wires on the board end. Okay, got the box reassembled, screws back in it. Just have to hope that the fan does not have a wire stuck in it. I don't believe it will, but when we first turn it on, if it's noisy, I'll have to take it back apart and move stuff around. Let's flip things over. Before flipping things over, one quick thing to note. The end of the power wire for the always-on fan on the heat crank that came down here, because that on this board is just going to that terminal, not actually a connector. I cut this off and then just wired it into the terminal itself in there. This may not be the best way because this piece I've got printed is all busted and needs to be replaced, but for now I put a couple drops of glue in it and tied this together. Alright, back around here at the front. So now we've got all our wiring loom. It sits well with the x-axis. There's room to move back and forth. So now we're going to get this mounted on there. So I got to looking and realized that the mount holes do not line up at all with that. So I had to go and find me something, and I'm thankful I have more than one printer. Because now we got to print an adapter plate. Okay. 2 screws in there, holding that in. You can see the 2 screws holding the unit itself to the plate I made. And we'll move on to our next part. I'm not sure what I'm going to do next here. I think I'm going to attach the fan, but I'm not 100% sure. I wanted to show also, I pulled the nozzle out before putting the heat break in because on all metal hot ends, you want this to screw down into the heat block as far as possible, and you screw the nozzle up into it. I did want to point out that these are a custom size nozzle. These are not standard size. Let me grab a standard and I'll compare. Okay, thermistor wire is hid behind the fan. This mount that I have apparently has this made to where I thought it was just a hole to get it to the screw, but I couldn't get the screw in there far enough, so I've got, thankfully, again, my big box of screws. Had one that was plenty long enough to come from here, go all the way through the fan and into the heatsink, and then there's just only this other one here that's into the heatsink. One of the as a side effect of my running this wire the way I am, to make sure I didn't pinch it, I've intentionally left the fan with just a hair of a gap. And that'll be fine. Airflow is still going to work fine. That'll help keep from damaging the wire. Plus, I noticed the thermistor wire does have a protective sleeve on it up to just above where I've got it there, so that'll help protect the wiring too. Okay, the rest of the power wire is bundled up here. Know that later on I'll have to open that back up to get to my blue and red for my part cooler. And then I added another zip tie wrapped around the motor here to act as a stress reliever on the heater cartridge wires. Okay, that strip of tape that it comes with was so long, I actually cut it in half. I only left the other half out, and because it recommended about 3 times around, just took it and wrapped it around it, thermistor and all. Helps to insulate. Now, on to figuring out how to raise up my Z-stop. Okay, loosen the 2 screws on the Z-stop and raise it up. It doesn't have a hard pin under it, but it's 2 screws. I don't think it's going to go anywhere. So done that and some bed leveling and hooked the Octoprint back up to it from the Raspberry Pi, and we're going to send an old print job and just see what happens. Okay, prototyping a prototype, I foresee some kind of a filament guide in my near future. Whether I keep a spool out here on the box inside or I put a mount back on top to help feed this. But otherwise, looking pretty good so far. I know the one other thing I'm going to do. You listen to the gearbox. I'm going to get in there and lithium grease all them teeth. One last thing I'm going to do, digging in a box and found the original, although I printed a different holder on it, filament holder that normally would have sat up here with it pointed backwards. Given how this is arranged, I think I'm just going to put it up here pointing forward so the filament can just feed straight down to the feeder. So quite some time has passed since I installed this. This is about 10 months later, but I'll finish up the installation video. Got a little squirrel cage fan in here and printed a shroud for it that attaches it, as well as air ducting, and there's baffling inside of that that helps divvy up the air pretty evenly between the two outputs. I did lithium grease the gears, although I will say, be very mindful, do not get the grease in the filament tooth path. That was a royal pain in the tail that requires some disassembly to properly clean. Other than that, yeah, this thing's working pretty good. I have had once or twice where I've gone, man, my prints all got sloppy, and I've realized I should probably have some Loctite for screws holding this plate onto the whole assembly, as well as the screws holding it to the printers. So, yeah, because every once in a while I've had to take it apart and tighten those because they've just worked loose with vibration and time. Other than that, this hot end is working pretty good.